In this diagram, I would like this diagram to represent God's intentions for the present. And you see in the center of the diagram, obedience equals demonstrations of God's love. That's really what God's will is. God's will is that we demonstrate His character. We demonstrate who He is. And He loves broken man in our broken communities. And He wants us to reflect that love. And how do we do that? We do that through obedience to God's will, by doing what He asks us to do, living the way that He asks us to live. So that's what this diagram is going to represent. And now let's put those three together. On the left-hand side, we have broken man. To the right, we see that He's looking out in the future, and God's intentions are that broken man see what God intends for him in the future as well as the present. Not just the future, but the future and the present. The good news of the present. What is that good news? I'll bet you suspect. I hope you do. Next slide. What happens? There's a wall in between broken man and God's good intentions for that broken man in the future as well as the present. What is that wall? It's sin. But you know what? It's not the sin of the world. It's my sin. It's our sin. It's our disobedience. It's our not doing the will of God. And that's what we've talked about earlier in some of these sessions, is that why does the church seem to be losing America today? And I believe it's for this very reason. It's not because of the sin of the non-believers around us. It's our sin. It's our not demonstrating what God's intentions are for broken man. And that sin, the world looks at and says, I cannot see God's intentions for the future or for now because of you. If you were God, what would you do to that wall? Well, when I teach this lesson, I hear people in the audience say, break it down. And I say, be careful. You're talking about yourself. No, God didn't break it down. Actually, the Bible tells us that we will struggle with sin until Jesus returns. But God did do something to the wall. Look at the diagram. He put a window in the wall. Wow. When there's a window in the wall, broken people can see what God's intentions are for the future and the present. How many panes does the window have? Well, 4. Can you guess what they might represent from an earlier lesson? Yes, they represent the 4 areas of Jesus' growth: physical, social, wisdom, and spiritual. These are the 4 areas that Luke 2:52 tells us that Jesus grew in. These were God's concern not only for His baby, but for us as we demonstrate God's love to the broken people of our community. And God intends that as people look through the window of the church, basically the church is a wall of sinful people in whom God placed a window so that broken people in the community can look through that wall and see His good intentions for them. Well, there's a problem. And the problem is that some churches, look at the slide, Some churches cover the physical area and they say, nuh-uh, nope, not for us. That's for the NGOs. That's for the government. We got to focus on the spiritual. And so when the broken people of the community look through the church, they don't see God's intentions for them in the physical area. Some other churches, they cover up the social area. Same thing. Not us. We're not a social gospel church. What happens? The people who look through that church don't see God's concern for them in the social arena. And then some other churches, they say, wisdom? Now, yes, we know that we need to proclaim the wisdom of God, but the people outside the wall, if they come inside or they come on the other side of the wall, we'll be more than happy to share with them what God's intentions are for all of life. But they got to come in first. So the broken people outside the wall, they look through the church and they don't see God's good news for them in wisdom, in the social arena, or in the physical arena. But look at the next slide. Spiritual? Yes. That's our calling. We're here to proclaim God's spiritual intentions. We're here to help people get saved. And boy, do we do that well. So as broken people outside the wall look through the church, what do they see? Oh, God cares about my future when I die. But not many come on the other side of the wall because they say, I'm hungry now. I'm without a job now. My son's a drug addict now. My husband's an alcoholic who comes home and beats me at night now. Does God have any good news for me now? What do we need to do? We need to wash the window. How do we wash the window? How do we clean it? We become active as God's people in demonstrating His love in every area now, by doing His will in every area, in our personal lives, in our family, in our relationship to our brothers and sisters in Christ. We do God's will in relationship to the people in our community, government, servants, employers, etc., even including our enemies. This is God's will. So I have a question that I'd like you to ask. And the question is this: which of the 4 areas of God's concern do you think the people of your community can clearly see as they look through the window of your church?